So one of the topics I've wanted to do for a long time is actually explaining step by step the Latin Mass. What are the prayers that actually go on? What is the difference between the Latin Mass and the Novus Ordo? Maybe you're just starting to get into the Latin Mass. Maybe you don't understand it completely yet, which I don't. Not that I think anyone will ever understand it completely, but just to I hope these videos will be helpful. So as a disclaimer, I am absolutely not a liturgist. I am absolutely not an expert by any means. When I talk about these prayers and these elements of the Latin Mass and how things are done, it's going to be pretty much just my experience and I guess you could say, like, my reflections on the parts of the Mass. These aren't necessarily always going to perfectly reflect church teaching or something. I'm going to certainly do my best, but if you want to really know more details, you should probably consult with priests or do your own research in the actual books. That said, I'm going to link a video that taught me from which I learned a lot of these parts of the Mass in a bit more detail. They're very good videos from the Priestly Society of St. Peter, whose charism it is to celebrate the Latin Mass. So, or perhaps there's more, but they always, I think they only celebrate the Latin Mass if they as much as they can. So what we're gonna start off with is not actually talking about the Mass, but what happens before the Mass. So in the Latin Mass, it is always the case that the priest will have to say certain prayers in the sacristy as he vests. So there are a number of special vestments that he wears. It's not just the like the chasuble, right? Like there's there are many like layers of vestments that he has to wear. Like one thing that's different in the Latin Mass that we don't really see in the Novus Ordo is the maniple. So on his arm he wears like some kind of like cloth, like representing like a servant's cloth, right? Because he is serving God, right? And that kind of represents his service as a deacon. He also wears like I don't remember all the technical terms, but in the video they explain them. They name all of them. He wears like something like around his neck, essentially. Like all of these have like special representations. Like the prayers that he reads, I'm pretty sure they're the full armor of God from St. Paul. And while this is happening, the server is expected to assist. So the altar server helps him however he needs. And it's a very prayerful atmosphere in the sacristy. Now, this is possible, or this is consistent with the Novus Ordo. From my experience altar serving in the Novus Ordo, I have not seen priests do this. I have not seen any altar servers needing to assist. I have not seen a prayerful atmosphere in the sacristy until they pray the prayer before Mass. I've often seen several priests, good solid priests, just vesting just quickly and just like chatting with the altar servers, with the readers. There wasn't that kind of like solemnity to that process, but it's very important to have that. And I've also been to a church that celebrates the Novus Ordo, or celebrates the Latin Mass once a month, but they have a different priest that does it. But their Novus Ordo is very reverent, and in the sacristy they actually, I didn't altar serve, so I don't know how it actually went, but they do have prayers for vesting, which was nice. I was glad to see that. So it's possible, but I'm sure it's much more rare than in the Latin Mass. Now, the other thing, I have some time, so we'll talk about the actual beginning of Mass, which is when the priests come. Well, I'll talk about the Novus Ordo Mass first because it's quicker. So the priests process, right? The priests and the altar servers will process in and approach the altar. So in the Novus Ordo, it's really, they might have like a prayer that they say before Mass, and I'll talk about that in a minute. And then they will approach the altar. The altar servers will go where they need to go. The priest will come up, kiss the altar, and he will bless everyone. So, and then he begins with the greeting, and then shortly after, sometimes they will have like a customized introduction, which I'm personally not a fan of, and then they go right into the Confiteor, like I confess to Almighty God. So the difference in the Latin Mass is that before any of that happens, there's something called the Asperges, which is specific to Sundays. The priest will actually sprinkle everyone with holy water, and then he does so in a special vestment, and then he will actually don the chasuble after doing so. That's on Sundays. On a typical Mass, they go, and then this happens after the Asperges. On a typical Mass, he then approaches the foot of the altar. So these are called the prayers at the foot of the altar. You don't see this at all in the Novus Ordo. The priest goes right up to the altar. In the Latin Mass, the priest and the server prepare themselves before they actually approach the altar. And that's a part of the liturgy. In the Novus Ordo, we might have this before the Mass, but in the Latin Mass, it's key. It's a key part of the actual liturgy. So these prayers are the Judicam Psalm, and right after they do the psalm, so the priest will recite part of the psalm, and they'll alternate with the server, and then the priest says the Confiteor, which is the I confess to Almighty God, and it's actually different. The words of the Confiteor in the Latin Mass are different, so they were actually changed in the Novus Ordo. There's a few things that are there's a couple elements that aren't quite there. There's a lot more saints directly invoked and asked for intercession, as well as Saint Michael the Archangel directly is asked to pray. So, and they also like bow while doing so. And then the server says the Confiteor, and he actually he's kneeling this whole time. The priest is standing, the altar server is kneeling, and the altar server is expected to bow very profoundly. And then the priest gives the absolution, and only then does the priest actually approach the altar. So I'm going to link more detailed videos in the description so that you can expand your knowledge of the Latin Mass and gain stronger appreciation for it. Now, I do hope that this video was a helpful beginning, and to anyone looking into the Latin Mass or trying to understand it better and to try to learn to pray it and do it more consistently, all the best. God bless. Thanks for watching. Bye.